Hey everybody, I'm Graham from GrowthBook, and today I'm going to show you how to use experimentation with the GrowthBook platform. So before we jump right in and show the experimentation side of GrowthBook, it's important to understand a little bit of how GrowthBook is different than other experimentation platforms. The biggest difference is that GrowthBook does not directly handle your event data itself. Instead, we use your existing event tracking systems like Segment, RudderStack, whatever you're using, and we tie in directly to your data warehouse wherever that event data ends up. And that could be something like Postgres, Redshift, Snowflake, wherever that ends up. Even things like Mixpanel and Google Analytics we support. So as part of the onboarding flow, you'll be asked to create that connection. But if you miss that step or you skipped it, you can always add the data sources at any time under the data source menu here. And so when you first go to create your data source, we ask you to identify what event tracker you're using. That just makes it really easy for you to get set up because we know the shape of that event data once you create that connection. If you're using something a bit more custom, you're welcome to just use a custom data source and then choose from any of the any of the supported data warehouses that we have here. Once that connection is set up, you then need to tell us a little bit about how do we pull exposure information, which user got exposed to which experiment and which variation from your data warehouse. So I'll show you what that looks like with our Postgres instance. So with this sample data we have here, we actually have two identifier types, and those are also sometimes called randomization units. So how are we bucketing users? This is, we have user ID and anonymous ID, but the core of this is the experiment assignment queries, otherwise known as exposure queries. So there's four different columns that we need to get out of this data warehouse. One of them is the user ID or some kind of randomization unit, the timestamp when they were exposed, the experiment they were exposed to, and which variation they got. And then any additional columns are automatically created as dimensions, which we'll get into a little bit later. So for instance, this particular experiment exposure query has device browser as an additional dimension, which you can see is being selected from here on the last row. So once you have that connection set up to your data warehouse and the exposure information defined, you then need to define the metrics that you're going to test against in your experiments. So when you go to create a metric, you'll be asked to define what metric type it is. And we support four different types of metrics: binomial, count, duration, and revenue. So once you give it a name, whatever that might be, you then can define the query that you're pulling this metric from. So you can just, anything you can query with SQL, you can create a metric for. We do have a query builder, which makes it a little bit easier if it's a simple query just to select the columns and table names. But also we support any custom SQL that you can write, even with crazy joins and all kinds of stuff. You can also use ratio metrics, so you can select a different metric as a denominator if you'd like to. The final step is then defining the behavior, and there's a lot of advanced options here. I won't go into all of them at the moment, but basically what we're asking you is to define the shape of this metric. Like, is it something you really care about? Do you have a very low risk threshold for this metric, or do you have a very high risk threshold? Are there conversion windows? Are there maximum number of or maximum percent change or minimum percent change that we should not display results if they're outside that range, because that's just too suspicious? So let's take a look at one metric that we've already defined. We'll take a look at average order value. So you can add some text description about this metric. We also give you some information about this metric over time and some average values here. On the right, we have the meta information about the metric, the SQL that was used to generate it, and then any behavioral changes that you've made to this metric. And at that point, you're done. So you've created a list of all the metrics that you would like to test against. And now you can do experimentation analysis without any additional SQL work or any help from analysts. It's entirely self-serve at this point. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So if we click onto experiments, we can do add new experiment. At this point, we'll automatically pull from your data warehouse and see if there's any new experiment data that's flowing in that we haven't created a report for, and we'll prompt you to do that. And in this sample database, we don't have that, so you can create from scratch. And you can define the name of the experiment, any hypothesis you're testing, so any dates. You can define the variations. If we're pulling this from a database, we'll actually know how many variations you have, but if you want to set this up beforehand, you're welcome to do that. You can add as many variations as you like. You can even control the splits if that's what you want. And then you choose the goal metric. So like what metrics are you trying to improve? And then you can choose guardrail metrics, which are metrics you're not necessarily trying to improve, but you don't want to hurt. Something like bounce rate or whatever that might be, pages per visit. We do have the notion of tags, so you can specify a set of metrics by tag, and then when you import them, you'll always get the same list, so you can make that a bit easier if you have groups of metrics that you always like to use. You'll also notice that we have this blue bar here that we've created a new feature that has an A/B test on it, but does not have an analysis for it. So you can also just create a page based on this, and we'll automatically populate everything for it except for the metrics. You have to set that here. So once you create this, and we can do that, I'll just choose some random stuff here. Once you create an experiment, you'll get this page. So we can add a description. We support full markdown here, so you can add images, you can add hypothesis, upload screenshots, whatever it is you need to document exactly what it is you're trying to test with this experiment. This doesn't have any real data yet, so let's take a look at one that does. So this purchase CTA test, we have quite a bit of documentation around why we created this test, any observations that we have, and then the hypothesis that we're testing. On the right, we have settings about this experiment. So where are we pulling the data from? What are the metrics? And then any phases. So phases are a way to segment in time the experiment in case there were some bugs that happened and you had to create a new time. And you can create a new phase at any point just by clicking here. So once you have that all set up, we have the experiment information here. So this is the actual results that are getting back from the warehouse. So on the left side, we have all the metrics that are added to this experiment. And then we have columns with the control variation, and then the new variation with price. So then we show you the raw values of what the differences were, and then we run it through our Bayesian statistics engine to show you the actual effects. So we have here average order value is not significant change, and it's down about 2%. And then the other ones are up. And this is quite common with experiments. You'll get some metrics that are down, some metrics that are up. Usually determining winners is a bit not always completely straightforward, so you have to apply a little judgment there on what you're really trying to do with this experiment. Rather uniquely to GrowthBook is that we expose the risk column, which is basically if you choose this particular variation and you're wrong, what's the expected loss on that metric? And this allows you to move a bit more quickly than you would just waiting for full significance on every test, because the risk score might be below your thresholds and it's fairly invariant, tends to converge quite quickly to a value and then not change too much. So for instance, average order value 2% might be fine for your risk threshold and you can just launch, but probably it's not, probably it's quite high, right? And same here for sign up rate. We have guardrail metrics down here, so just making sure they're not worse. So we show green when they're not worse. And then we have the notion of ad hoc reports. So this is a snapshot of an experiment, and you might want to do further analysis of this without actually affecting the original results. So you can just go up here, do, sorry, that was the wrong button. Create ad hoc report. And then we can configure this experiment with any custom options. We can remove metrics. We could add a different segment, like maybe only look at the US visitors, any different changes like to the attribution model or, conversion windows, anything like that. And then we can run that and get a different version of our analysis. And then we can document what this is. So we can say, I don't know, only US visitors. And then you could give it something like something, whatever that might be. You can publish it to make it visible to other people in your organization. And then when you go back to the experiment, you'll see down here we have all the different ad hoc reports. And then this one here we have there. So it's a way of keeping all the different analyses you do based on that one experiment in one place, so you can come back to look at it later. One of our philosophies here at GrowthBook is to always be transparent with every number and values that we give you. So you can go over here and click on View Queries, and we'll give you the full queries that we use to generate all the numbers on this page. So if you do have a data team and you want to export this into Looker mode and do a custom analysis, you're welcome to do that. We never want to be a black box that we just kind of trust us, this is working. We always want to give you full transparency into what's happening. You can also download the entire thing as a Jupyter notebook, and that comes with our statistics package baked right in, and a connection to your data source, so you can just immediately jump in and start exploring the data. And you can also download as a CSV if that's more your style. So getting a bit deeper here, you can break down by dimensions. So we can take a look at this experiment by date, and then you can choose whether or not to do snapshot by day or do a cumulative. We also have any custom dimensions. So if you remember, we had that dimension column that we returned in the exposure queries. You can also set custom dimensions over here on the right, sorry, on the left. And these can be any attributes about your user, like country or browser, whatever they might be. And then you can break down by that. So we can take a look at like country. It gives you a good way to deep dive into the metrics that you're exploring. We currently don't do any corrections on the number of metrics, so we encourage you to use this as not causal metrics. So don't make decisions based on the dimensional columns, but use that as perhaps interesting data for a future test. So on the GrowthBook platform, we also have some sanity checks on the data. One of them is a sample ratio mismatch to make sure that if you say the experiment is 50-50, that the ratio of each variation that you get back is within the same statistical range. So if you say it's 50-50 and we get back something like 49-51, there's probably a problem in your implementation of the experiment. And so we warn that. So I'll show you what that looks like. I'll just automatically force a sample ratio mismatch. So if we update the data now, we did have this set for 50-50, and yeah. So now we're getting a sample ratio mismatch. So if you see this error happen, take a look at it. We do have some other sanity checks as well. So when this experiment's finished and you're happy with the results, you can click Mark as finished. You can choose what happened with the experiment, won, lost, or inconclusive. And then you can give some reasons to why you stopped it, test 1, and then you can say, although average was down, purchases and revenue per user were up significantly. Okay, so you can mark it as stopped. You can document why that is. Let me just update that sample ratio mismatch to get rid of that error. Okay, so now we've documented this test as finished, and you'll see it in the experiment list here as stopped, and you can see that it's 1. So running an A/B test and getting the results back and then analyzing them is an important part of your experimentation program, but there are other sides of it that help encourage your experimentation culture at your company that we've built features for at GrowthBook. So we have a dashboard here, and we let you pick a North Star metric. So that's like a global metric that you're trying to improve, and then we'll show you all the tests that will run against it. And then as a Gantt chart style, this is sample data that's been running for too long, but you'll see like the period of time where it was running, and then hopefully you can start seeing cumulative effects as that metric starts bending up. We then show you the velocity rate, how many experiments you're running at the team, and then any kind of recent events that have happened on the experimentation program. One of the cool features we have at GrowthBook is presentations. So because we have screenshots that you've added and documentation about the experiment, we can actually automatically generate you a presentation. So we can say, look at that 1 or 2 A/B tests that we just finished, and then we'll automatically generate you a slide deck. And you can customize the colors or whatever your branding is. There's numerous options here. Once we're ready, that we can name this. And then save that, and then you can present it to your team. So we base these presentations off Airbnb's experiment review meetings. And what you do is you present your team with the experiment that you ran and the hypothesis and the metrics you're trying to improve. And you get everyone to guess without seeing beforehand what happened, what the results were of this experiment. So raise your hand if you think the left one, raise your hand if you think the right one, and then you reveal the winner. and then you can talk about the results. This way you build a lot of humility because people are often wrong, and this saves a lot of time because you can just share these out with your team really quickly. We also find it's very helpful because people really don't like being wrong. So they'll say, oh, I'm not really wrong. It's because of X. And actually, usually X is a pretty good follow-up test. So it's a great way to create that flywheel effect of testing, sharing, learning, and then testing again. Well, I hope you enjoyed this look at the experimentation side of GrowthBook. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. We have a user Slack channel, which you can find on our website. You can also email us at hello@growthbook.io. And thanks very much.